I think it goes back to like kind of our primal roots, of course, like meat and fire. It's pretty as basic as it gets. It's about as complicated as I get, too. For me, steak is kind of like a nostalgia, as is barbecue in Texas. But yeah, I think we're just kind of used to it. And it's kind of a comfort food for everybody.
You're listening to the Taste Podcast. I'm Editor-in-Chief Matt Rodbard, here with Senior Editor Anna Hezel.
On today's show, Matt's talking to BBQ superstar Aaron Franklin, whose latest book is Franklin's Steak. Later on, you'll hear Matt hosting a conversation in Los Angeles about coffee. With who did you talk to?
This is, anyone who drinks coffee out there knows about coffee, epic lineup. Geoff Watts, Vice President of Coffee at Intelligentsia Coffee. Kyle Glanville, co-founder of Gogan & Tiger. Christopher Nicely, Abel Alameda, co-owner and head barista at Menotti's. And Bronwen Serna, an educator at Counterculture Coffee. What a lineup that was.
Incredible. But let's talk about steak for a second.
Yeah, Aaron Franklin, man, he's famous in Austin for barbecue, but really his latest book tackles steak.
How is this book going to change my cooking at home steak game?
He takes a second look at a lot of these conventions and this conventional wisdom. One thing he really talks about are those really like 1980s Applebee's commercial grill marks that you see on steaks. It's like the steak emoji. Anna, shocker, you don't want those grill marks on your steak.
So you're telling me that right now in 2019, grill marks are bad?
Yes, Anna, you want crust all over your steak. You don't want it in specific grill mark area. It was quite the conversation with a modern meat master.
I have a lot to learn. Here's Matt with Aaron Franklin.
Aaron Franklin, thank you for joining the Taste Podcast.
Heck yeah, thanks for having me.
It's great to see you. The book was originally going to be called Steak AF. Is that true or false?
Oh, I really wanted to call it The Stakes Are High, but then we didn't know if that was true or not.
De La Soul record?
Well,
reference maybe?
No, not a De La Soul reference,
okay.
Unfortunately. Darn.
But still good.
I should have known that. I should have checked the email.
So, but it ended up being Franklin's Steak, right?
Yep.
Is that what it's called? Franklin's Steak, right?
Yeah, we also wanted to call it Stakeout, but thought that was probably taken.
Yeah,
there were a lot of terrible ideas, but anywho, we finally landed on Franklin's Steak. Yeah,
it's a really cool book. It's kind of a continuation from the barbecue book, which is a massive bestseller, but also just such a cult favorite. I just want to backtrack to that right now. Are you seeing still a lot of people sending you Instagrams of them building their barbecue sets?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, when Jordan and I did the first book, really what we wanted to do was like, well, doesn't really need recipes, I need this. But we really wanted it to be like one of those books that's just always on the kitchen counter, that's torn up, it's got grease stains all over it, and barbecue sauce splatters on it. And I think it's actually turned into that, which is really, really cool because we still hear so much feedback from it. And, people, Instagramming pictures or like, check out my first brisket, and stuff like that.
That's so cool. And you respond
cool.
and you interact with them. I see that a lot. So that's nice. Tell me, why then? We're moving on to steak. Why, is that a natural progression from barbecue for you?
Well, for me it was because I kind of started with, really long cooks and, expensive, not steaks, not expensive, but like really like big pieces of meat, long cooks and losing sleep and all this stuff. So it seemed like a natural progression for us to do something a little bit, easier at the end of working on the barbecue book. Mm-hmm. We kind of get done with that and we cooking ribs and stuff. And it's like, let's just go grill a steak. Right. Took so much less time. But we found ourselves getting really passionate about steak.
Completely.
And it did seem like a natural progression. Probably backwards for most people.
Yeah, I would think so. But you do talk about dry aging, which is actually probably longer than barbecue. Is longer.
Well, it definitely takes longer.
Several months longer. But I want to know just like, what's it about beef that really excites you? You're a beef guy.
Well, I did grow up in Texas. So I guess I've got that going for me.
You got that.
As
state
did Jordan.
pride.
Yeah, it's in my genetics. I don't know. I mean, beef is awesome. I mean, I really, that's always been kind of my favorite. And I think it's interesting enough because there's just so many different muscles, and not that I'm a butcher or anything, but, like a brisket is tricky because it's got two muscles and you've got all these different steak cuts and they all cook different. I think, texturally, it's really interesting because the different fats melted in different ways and stuff. I don't know. It's just kind of like a really interesting type of food, I think.
And we have amazing beef in America.
We do.
I'm going to wave the flag because honestly, we really we both have traveled throughout the world, and we just have for the price, we have great beef, right? I mean,
yes and no.
Oh, I love it.
I think, but yeah, I mean, we're lucky in this country to have some pretty incredible stuff.
Yeah.
But there's really great beef all over the world. I mean, you go to, all over Europe. I mean, these cows are eating, like field peas and grazing on the sides of mountains and getting the sun on only the left sides of their bodies. I mean, there's all kinds of cool stuff going on. So, kind of like barbecue has a regionality. I mean, beef really does too.
Yeah.
And we're lucky here in this country to have a lot of that stuff. We've got some great land out there.
Yeah. Good point. Point taken. I think definitely if you go to Japan, of course, the beef there is probably the most exquisite in the world.
Yeah, but totally different. I mean, it tastes completely different, even though it's got, higher fat content. Like the flavors are totally different too.
Yeah. You offer, it's very prescriptive. You offer a lot of ways to cook steak. And you myth bust quite a bit. So we can talk about, I don't want to give away the whole book, but I just want to in general, I wanted to hear a couple, how are we cooking steaks wrong, Aaron Franklin?
Well, I don't know that I think aside from dipping in a, pot of boiling water and overcooking it, that's pretty wrong.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's really a wrong way. I think there's maybe just more right ways. It's kind of how I would look at it.
Yeah.
I'd never be like, you're doing that wrong. That's terrible. But I think it's neat to, and one thing we tried to do with the book was, we didn't really go into this book with a hard outline. It's like, well, this is a myth that we need to disprove or prove or whatever. We just kind of let the steak tell us where to go with it.
Yeah.
And we learned a lot, and our path changed considerably throughout cooking all this stuff. I mean, Jordan and I probably cooked over 100 New York strips and developed all kinds of well, this happened. I didn't see that happening. But we kind of found more right ways to do it, I guess. And, some of those would be, for example, salting a steak 30 hours in advance, 24 hours in advance, 48 hours, 72 hours. I mean, we did all kinds of experiments and quickly found that was, kind of 30-hour mark-ish of pre-salt at 1.58% by weight was I thought the perfect way to do a steak and air dry it in the fridge. Didn't see that coming. It just kind of happened.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's a wrong way. I mean, sometimes you just got to pull steak out of the fridge and throw it in a skillet and cook it because you need dinner. But
and
if you've got the time,
of course,
there's some cool things you can do.
And speaking of time, it struck me about resting the steak. You are not.
People seem to be really talking about that a lot. That's interesting.
I think, and you write really beautifully about how there are no rules about resting. You may have in your family a history of resting. Your grandfather rested the steak for 30 minutes with great ceremony. And you shouldn't say, hey, Grandpa, you were fucking wrong, because that's just kind of rude.
Well, it's rude.
It's rude.
Don't tell old Gramps he's wrong.
We both said rude. It's rude. So, but still, you came upon this conclusion that resting is maybe not.
Well, it is still resting. You have to think about the size of a piece of meat. Obviously, a brisket is huge. I know we're talking about the steak book, but it's for good contrast. A brisket might go on at 15 pounds, 10 pounds. I mean, that's a giant piece of meat. And it cooks a long time. It's got a lot of momentum. So obviously the resting period might be 2-3 hours for that before it kind of comes up to temp and then starts to drop. But you don't have to rest a little steak that long. I mean, if it's a little flank steak or a filet or vide or something like that, it can totally rest while it's on the plate on the way to the table. It's just not that big of a piece of meat. So I think everything should rest for a little bit, but it should kind of coincide with the size and the momentum that it's got. And also, I mean, if you're cooking a piece of maybe a strip or a ribeye or something super rare, doesn't have much temperature going on anyway. You don't need to rest it.
You don't need to, and that's probably a great way to cook a ribeye.
Yeah, and I think for resting, if you can touch it and you can cut it, it's ready to eat.
Yes,
that's totally going to.
That is the takeaway.
Shouldn't be too precious.
Exactly, and then on the flip side, on the other side is just the tempering or bringing to temperature.
Yeah, totally.
That's a little bit of a thing that you've come up with.
Yeah, and that's pretty normal.
So tell us the actual prescription.
Well, I guess kind of if you think about it, that's the way I think of barbecue too. But if you kind of you don't necessarily want to put an ice cold piece of meat in on a raging hot grill, and you do not necessarily want to slice up a raging hot steak, right on a ice cold plate. I mean, just kind of let things ease into where they're going to be. So, it on steak, it kind of goes, if you're thinking about the surface of the piece of meat and how you want the inside cooked. It's like, all right, so I want the outside to be really crusty, want the inside to be super rare. Obviously, maybe it should be pretty cold when you put it on, so you might just pull it right out of the refrigerator. But if it's a huge piece of meat, like a giant tomahawk or something like that, it's going to take a long time to get the center where you want it cooked right, but you don't want to get the outside too crusty or you don't want to burn it. You probably want to temper it, and that means let it sit on the counter, not for long enough where it's going to make anybody sick or go bad or anything, but maybe like 30 minutes, maybe an hour at 60 degrees. I mean, the thing's 32 degrees coming out of the refrigerator. Yeah. It's going to take a while to kind of warm up to room temperature. So that stuff makes a huge difference.
But most of the steaks we're cooking, we're not cooking these giant cuts. We're cutting.
Well, we are down in Texas.
Yeah, down in Texas, yeah.
Everything's bigger.
But I think in general, pulling it out of the fridge and cooking it is not like that bad of a...
It's not terrible. It can be done, but it makes you kind of want to think about how hot should my skillet be. If it's a strip that's 2 inches thick, you might want to start off at a slower temperature so you give the meat time to kind of just guide it in that direction.
We've talked for 10 minutes about cooking steak.
I could probably talk all day.
But like, why do we as a culture just love talking about the cooking of steak? We're not talking about like endive in the same way.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think it goes back to like kind of our primal roots, of course, like meat and fire. It's pretty as basic as it gets. It's about as complicated as I get too. But yeah, I mean, I think everybody kind of grew up, in this country, grew up in the Midwest, you're probably eating steaks and kind of wherever you grew up. I think for me, steak is kind of like a nostalgia, as is barbecue in Texas. But yeah, I think we're just kind of used to it. It's kind of a comfort food for everybody.
You compare sous vide steak cookery to the Japanese bidet style toilet.
Thanks, Jordan. Really got me to pickle on this one. Yeah, I think so. I wouldn't quite go that far, maybe, but
the book does.
Jeez, I think you slipped that in after we talked about it.
But it has a point, and
it does. So kind of the thing, I think a lot of people get crazy on sous vide, like, oh, it's the best way to cook a steak. But it doesn't really impart any flavor. You're cooking something in a plastic bag. And texturally, that's really cool, but it's hard to get flavor. Like you get a grill, or you've got Maillard reaction in a hot skillet, or you've got butter that you can kind of poêle on there or whatever. You're imparting flavor in this piece of meat. You're kind of coaxing certain things out of it. You got salt and all this stuff. But in a bag, it's just, you've got a really perfectly cooked piece of meat. Yeah. But I don't know that you're ever going to get like that rosemary butter note out of that after you sear it on a grill.
Yeah, that quick sear.
Yeah, and cooking wise, and sous vide is great. And if you're cooking for a lot of people, obviously that's a great way to feed a lot of people a massive amount of food. But I kind of, on a personal level, I kind of like the gradient. I don't like it like hard sear and then 2 inches or an inch and a half or whatever of perfectly cooked medium. Like, I like the textural differences in there. I like kind of gradient where it's like good crust, then it's a little overcooked, and then it gets kind of rare.
Yeah. I texture is such a big part of
It's a huge
food.
part. It's like the biggest part of steaks, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that's kind of what you lose. I think you kind of lose the craft a little bit in sous vide. But another cool thing that you can do along the same lines is kind of what some people call a reverse sear, which is what you would do with a sous vide thing anyway. But you can kind of bring something up real slow in an oven. You could kind of bring it up real slow on a grill, get some smokiness, get some charcoal kind of flavors, let it rest, and then sear it off when your friends show up. Same principle, just kind of different execution.
Yeah, it's slow cookery, then that
but
final
there's
sear.
a time and a place for everything.
For sure. And I like also you talk about grill marks, like those iconic lines. Probably there was an emoji for a steak, they would put the grill marks.
Sure there is.
But you're talking about grill marks not really being indicative of great steak.
Not necessarily. I secretly... Every time I grill a steak, I try to make like those super like 80s looking grill marks. You see, like a Nighthawk TV dinner. Yeah. Like perfect crosshatch. Yeah. And I do it, and then I just start flipping the steak a bunch and totally cover them up because it really just doesn't matter that much. And I think you can cook a much better steak by flipping back and forth a bunch of times as opposed to that one side. It overcooks a little bit, and then you flip it. It's like just a little bit, kind of inch in. But if you're cooking like that, it's really hard to get really great grill marks, although they are pretty.
They are pretty. They're great for the gram, but you do kind of mention like the whole top layer should be a grill mark, right? I mean,
kind of.
Yeah, it's just that's the great texture you're looking for.
Yeah.
I think I want to talk a little bit about your barbecue business because it still is kind of going strong, right? You guys are selling.
Yeah, people are definitely showing up. It's cool.
What's the status of the cutting the line policy at Franklin these days?
Well, there isn't one.
Oh. You can't cut the line.
No, it is definitely not a thing.
That's what I thought.
I
love it.
I
love that about you.
Everybody all you got to do is show up. It's not that hard. Yeah, you might have to wait for a little bit, but it's fun. I think, if you're really trying that hard to skip the line, maybe you're kind of missing out on just kind of the big picture of it. And it's not nice for other people.
No, it's not nice. It's equal, and you get to have fun in that line. Throw some footballs around, maybe have some brown spirits.
Yeah, totally.
I love that about your restaurant.
Absolutely.
What are you serving right now at your restaurant?
Exactly the same thing we've always served.
Cool.
Just 5 meats, 3 sides, pies. That's it.
Yeah. You're happy with it? You like it? You like what you're doing?
Oh, it's great. I think the steak was a bit of an extension on that because we do the same thing every day at Franklin Barbecue. It's like try to make the best brisket we can, but it's just one piece of meat, and ribs and turkeys and all this stuff. And steak, I think people are like, oh, what's next? What's next? It's like, well, I learned how to cook steak, and I guess we wrote about it.
Yeah, and it's a natural progression. I wanted to get back to steak and talk about marbling because I think there is some truth and false about marbling and the importance of marbling. Is it important, Aaron Franklin? Is marbling important?
It's definitely important. So there are different types of fats, and I think I've heard people think it's like, oh, fat makes everything good. Fat, need more fat. But the reality is there are different types of fat. I mean, there's some kind of pretty gross fat out there that I don't want to eat.
No.
But that doesn't mean I don't like a heavily marbled steak. So I think it depends on what kind of texture you want out of a piece of meat. And, I think that goes into like a filet versus, like a ribeye.
Yeah.
And everybody kind of is like, oh, ribeye's king. It's got so much fat. But texturally, I kind of like a filet. And even though it doesn't have a lot of natural fat in there, I think there's a way to kind of replace that sort of get more flavor. But yeah, a highly grated piece of meat is always best.
Beautiful. And I like that you write about the rise of the ribeye and how the filet has kind of been put
everybody
aside.
makes fun of the filet.
Yeah.
It's a nice little piece of meat, though.
It's delicious. It's
like butter.
Exactly, like butter. I mean, you want to have that really tender piece of steak sometimes. I mean,
sometimes you can have a ribeye and a filet on the same plate and just kind of go back and forth.
That's dope.
Yeah.
I think you get texture and you get the butter. You get like multiple textures, what I'm trying to say, with both those cuts.
For sure. But it is nice to have a prime or a better graded filet, though.
Have you tinkered with like dairy cows, like Holsteins?
Yeah,
them?
Totally.
Talk about that because I think there's a lot of talk about it's humane. It's a use of meat that maybe we were using.
I think those are some of the best steaks I've had have been from old, like 10-plus-year-old dairy cows, and they don't have much fat. That's kind of the thing.
Yeah.
But I still think so. If you're looking at an animal that's heavily marbled and stuff, and it was a fast growth, it takes a lot of time to develop these flavors in an animal. And a dairy cow is a perfect thing, even though they're lean, but they've been around for a long time, so they've developed a lot of cool flavors in there, and their muscles are developed, and they have better intermuscular fat versus subcutaneous fat and all this stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's great. I mean, there's no reason to not be utilizing those animals.
Yeah. And then also, hamburgers too. I've heard there's like dairy hamburgers out there.
Oh, yeah.
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 It's cool. I wanted to also talk about your travels. Like you travel a bit, and
a little bit.
Japan? Have you been to Japan?
No, I haven't. I'm kind of scared to go. I think it might ruin me forever.
Let's talk about that. Why?
Well,
because you love Japan. I know that.
I do, and all signs point to that being just like the ultimate. Like, oh my god, the coffee, the beef, everything, and obviously the sushi and just the attention to detail that they have over there culturally, and just one guy making rice for 30 years to make the perfect grain of rice. I mean, that is insane. I love that. I think maybe I should wait and go there after.
But isn't that
after we retire, so we could really spend some time there?
But isn't that kind of what you've done with Franklin Barbecue? You really have spent
unintentionally, maybe.
Sure. I'm not intentionally, of course,
but that's kind of where my brain goes.
Yeah.
Like, that is so awesome. Like this one craft that is just so finely honed. I should not go to Japan for a while. For sure.
I'm sure you've had offers to extend Franklin to Japan. Has that
come in? A little bit. It would never happen.
Yeah.
There's no way.
I feel like
we don't have the right wood.
Really? That's what's holding you back, the wood source?
Well, we don't want to.
Yeah. There you go.
There's that too.
There's that too.
We already work way too hard.
You write about Extabari from northern Spain.
Yeah,
have you been there?
I have not eaten there, but Jordan has a few times, and man, it is so high on my list. I think we're going to try to go there next year to go eat some dinner. Man, that guy seems so awesome, and that's kind of
awesome.
That meal. The first time that Jordan went there, I think was kind of the beginning of the steak book. He just had like a huge aha moment, and that's going. He's like, man, I just had the greatest steak in my life. Oh my god! Like he was so inspired by that.
I feel like I've never been there either, and I've read about it, and it's kind of like the place I want to go next. It just seems like
it's definitely the place I want to go next.
That's amazing. We ask all of our guests on the Taste Podcast if there was a dream cookbook project in the works in your brain, no deadlines, no restrictions. What would that be for you?
Oh my gosh, I've never thought about it. Probably a pop-up book of crispy tacos.
Let's workshop.
I'm just making this up on the fly.
Of course, that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, just look at that all day and.
Oh my gosh!
No recipes.
Just is the crispy tacos of Texas?
Of anywhere.
Yeah,
I don't discriminate. If it's a taco and it's crispy, I'll eat it.
Aaron Franklin, thank you for joining the Taste Podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Here's Matt talking coffee with the folks from Intelligentsia, Go Get 'em Tiger, Counterculture Coffee, and Menotti's.
Thank you for coming in. Wanted to start by just asking each of you, and I'll start with you nicely. Give me one word for espresso. What comes to mind? One word.
Life.
Down the go. Life.
I hate this question. What's the point? But complicated?
Yeah. Complicated.
I would say underrated.
Underrated. Interesting. Clap in the audience. And Geoff, one word for espresso.
I'm going to say R. Kelly.
Oh, man. I heard a boo, too, in the audience.
That gives it a bad connotation,
Wow.
Geoff.
I think he's trying to give it a bad connotation.
He is. Okay, so
Geoff hates espresso. That's a fact.
That's the context.
Speaking to the microphone, Geoff, so we can pick it up. Yeah.
I'm
So,
sorry.
Geoff, I'm going to go to you.
For the record, I do not hate espresso. However,
But Geoff, you're a.
He's financially vested in espresso, so he cannot say he hates espresso.
Okay, so Geoff is, for the background, Geoff is a co-founder of Intelligentsia, which sells a shitload of espresso.
we do.
But
We do.
we went to Africa together. I wrote about it in the magazine. And you told me we were walking through a coffee farm in southern Ethiopia. You made this statement, I do not like espresso. Explain.
See?
I set it up that way.
Yeah, so, espresso can be very good, can be very tasty. And it's done a lot of great things in this world for this industry. And it's responsible, I think, for a lot of the accomplishments that we've made as an industry. It's also responsible for some of the worst developments in our industry, and I see it as a tremendous obstacle to furthering the cause of quality, especially as it relates to the work of coffee farmers.
You're tying it directly to coffee farmers.
Yes.
That's nicely respond. You own 2 cafes in Los Angeles, and you sell a lot of espresso.
Yeah, I think he's talking about, how good we can actually make sure it's a fair representation of the farmer's work. How good we end up serving it is ultimately that last, impression of what that coffee is supposed to be. So for me, I'm like, well, I just make sure, I don't mess up his job, and mess up his great work of making sure the green coffee is good, so.
Bronwen?
Well, I just feel it's very underrated because, like Geoff said, it can be very, very bad when it is bad. But given the cultural context, so it is it's like what Kyle said earlier, it's like whiskey. It's an acquired taste. So if you don't grow up like a European drinking espressos all the time, then it's going to taste very strong, it's going to taste very bitter, but when you get that God shot, it's amazing.
Kyle, what is a God shot? We were talking about it. It's like 1 out of 20. right?
I mean, 1 out of 20 in like the best coffee bar in the world would be like an incredible God shot, which that's a term I haven't heard for like 10 years. I appreciate it.
God shot's awesome. I love it.
But it is espresso has a ton of like inherent defects and problems. You are squeezing water through a wafer of coffee at hundreds of pounds of pressure, and it's meant to fail, and it's meant to be bad. Which is why we have kind of worked around it. Like we kind of like got stuck with espresso, and then we had to make it not suck.
Yeah.
And I think like the filter coffee stuff and the stuff that Geoff has really pioneered as a green coffee buyer, which is like more focused on the provenance of the coffee, on the specific flavors of this Ethiopian coffee or this Ecuadorian coffee or this Peruvian coffee, and then the farms within that. Espresso is just a way to brew coffee. It does impose a lot of specific nuance to it. Yeah. But, okay, to answer your question, a God shot is sweetness is king.
Yeah.
And if you get like just amplified, resonant, beautiful sweetness, that's like the surfboard. And all the beautiful other characters, whether it's like the floral or vanilla or chocolate, they ride the surfboard of sweetness.
Who thinks about sweetness? Show of hands for their coffee. Just be honest. So we've got about half in the audience. When I don't think about sweetness often.
For me, it's honestly a feeling.
Okay.
I said this earlier. I'm like, coffee or a shot of espresso that I enjoy most is something that I feel, as opposed to something that I'm going to be having a session with, that I'm going to be drinking for an extended amount of time. That shot of espresso represents 2 to 3 sips to start my day, where I'm like, man, I need that to work. I need to feel it, and I need to get on my business. So.
I want to go to you nicely. I want to hear you speak with customers every single day at your cafes. You're working the bar often. What do you wish more coffee drinkers knew about coffee? I'm going to go down the line because I know there's going to be different opinions.
There's where I would use the word complicated, where I would hope that the coffee drinkers that I meet, and then the idea of me is like, I think you qualified it in the email, like, what's a typical coffee drinker? And I was like, well, what's typical? I mean, how my grandma had it was different than maybe how his grandma had it, and that I think is relatable enough to understand that we've all come from cultures and backgrounds that appreciate it a lot differently. And so typical or the coffee drinker, that was tough for me to wrap my head around. And especially on where we are in Venice, I mean, we literally see everything, bums to billionaires. And I mean, a lot of those bums are, just disguised as billionaires.
We'll be billionaires in one day.
I wrote the joke a lot differently. Actually, my man Derek heard me say it and deliver it a lot differently. But nonetheless, you feel what I'm saying.
You're crediting your writer. I got
to. I mean, I'm here as a result of a lot of these people sitting here. So and in this room. So yeah.
Let's go down, Kyle. Just tell me what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think specifically like the people who go to Intelligentsia or Go Get 'em Tiger or Menotti's or drink counterculture coffee, just the astounding improbability of the thing that you're about to enjoy. If you live in LA and you patronize one of these shops, you are drinking the top 1% of the coffee in the world. And the reason that it is that is because from seed, a farmer made a choice to dedicate their life's work to a way of doing things which is 5-10 times as hard as doing it the commodity way. And then
what's commodity? Let's define that for our audience.
Bulk coffee sold on an open market, and the markets fluctuate based on supply and demand.
Okay.
There's no flavor distinction. It's all below what, you like, well below what we would sell.
It's not valued based on how it tastes.
Yeah.
More or less.
Exactly.
Yeah, so, like, I think, and then all the way, and, like, I opened Intelligentsia in Silver Lake in 2007, and, we kind of, like, spawned a lot of, like, jokes about baristas, like, waxing their mustaches and telling you all about the farm and all this, and it's, like, easy to make fun of, right? Because it's like, I don't need all that shit, just give me my fucking coffee. I, like, get it. I totally get it. Yeah. But the reason that is essential to storytelling has become such a feature is because it is like you have to have every person in the chain of custody operating at fucking Michael Jordan level greatness to deliver the coffee that like we all get for $4.
Well, we were going to get into that is an applause from the audience, and we can get to the price because we all can agree that coffee is not expensive enough, and we don't pay enough for coffee. Bronwen, a little bit more about what you think your end user needs to maybe know a little bit more about coffee that you wish.
I'm going to harken back to what Nicely said, that it is complicated. Most people that I've educated, not only here in LA, but I recently came from living in Southeast Asia for the past 3 years. So this concept of specialty coffee has spread very globally. And a lot more people, particularly in that part of the world, where it is an origin. There are lots of origin countries around that area, Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia. And they're willing to pay the price, but that market there is also very young. It's as young as the LA market, about 5-6 years. To be
12 years.
Okay, 12 years. But really, the really good coffee came when your shop came into play, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but it's complicated, and a lot of what I think consumers fail to realize is, unlike wine or liquor or any food product, is that they don't hold coffee in such high regard. So they think of it just as easier than expected. And then when they come to classes like a brewing science class or try to make espresso themselves, they don't really understand, like, why does this taste so bad? You know? So it's about educating the consumer, but also a lot more consumers now, because of how coffee and specialty coffee has grown over the past 20 years, really. They're a lot more educated, and there are a lot more questions, and they're a lot more curious. So I'm very hopeful.
I want you to hear from Geoff, but we will come back to the origin of Los Angeles coffee. There was this 8 years ago, 12 years ago, so that's controversial and also very interesting. But Geoff, we'll get to that.
It's not controversial.
Okay. Geoff,
I'm with you. It's 12 years.
To get to the point.
2007.
One thing you wish customers, just maybe something anecdotal from being on farms a lot and that being your life.
Well, it's quality. It's quality. Because it's a word that's really easy to say, and we throw it around, and we talk about this connection between the value of coffee, whether it's to you as a coffee drinker, what's the value of it to you? Is it tied to the taste? And the value to the farmer, who really is the artist. They're the primary producer. You know, all of us do a lot of work to curate and to make sure that we shepherd coffee to its final destination without spilling a drop of quality out inadvertently by mishandling it. And we play our part in the creation of or the interpretation and delivery of quality. But the quality of a coffee, its true intrinsic potential, is defined by the things that happen on the farm. Yet the farmer tends to be completely invisible, usually behind this wall of artifice and fashion. And ultimately, one of the questions I think you have to ask yourself, if you're thinking about, well, how do we make sure that quality is somehow attached to the farmer's work? You know, we first have to come to a collective definition of what the hell is quality. You know, how do I measure it? What does it look like? What does it taste like? And if you go around the room and ask everybody what's quality, I imagine we'll get 15 different answers.
Some people might say espresso.
We might get 15, yeah, and some people might say it's French roast, and some people might say it's coffee that tastes like peaches, and some might say it's sweet coffee, some might say it's coffee with bitterness, and there's room for all that. I mean, if you're a hip-hop dude, right? You're a New York guy. You know, so you'd say Biggie Smalls.
Black Moon.
Biggie Smalls, quality, not quality.
Quality.
I mean,
quality. Nas.
The most quality.
Quality. Tribe Called Quest.
Early career Nas only quality. Sorry.
KRS-One.
Wow. I mean, this
KRS-One. Quality.
Flipping it on me.
Okay, but quality. It's all quality, but it's very different. KRS-One, Biggie, Tribe, they're different. Sean Puffy Combs.
Controversial.
Maybe not quality. Not quality. You know, there's...
Yeah.
Shout out to my guy, though, for naming out a decent amount of hip-hop artists, though.
No,
Jeff
is low-key. He'll go from Alchemist to, like, definitely...
He's got a catalog, yeah.
No, but so in this realm, we can all come to a pretty clear and quick definition of what's quality, what's not. In coffee, it's really fucking hard right now because there's so much noise and misunderstanding about from what does quality derive, what are the markers, what are the indicators, how do I know it when I see it, and more importantly, how do I know when it's not quality?
Well, and the problem with the markers and the indicators is that the pretenders are getting better at the markers and the indicators without the substance.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, it's harder to discern and parse. I want to talk about roasting because I think we talk about the farmer being important, and of course we all agree. But then you get to roasting, and this is a Kyle and Bronwen question because you both you roast now, and you work for counterculture, which roasts. So the question is like really how important is roasting to this actual chain that we're kind of trying to build right now?
I mean, roasting is it's essential. You don't want to try it the other way.
Yeah, people have them. Sure.
It's not good. Oh yeah,
That's
people
thing,
have
right. White coffee. Did you read about it?
White zombie
roasted
was like a
coffee.
Vietnam thing where it was like barely roasted and it was like super sour.
Well, now
Anyways,
I mean,
I don't know if the question is like how important is it to roast.
No, that's not, because I think it's more like the actual roasting. How important is that step?
Yeah, I mean, the roaster plays the roaster is not just the roaster. The roaster is the buyer first. And that, it's interesting. When I started in coffee in Seattle, along these people flanking me also did. And I was terrified of Bronwen when she came in.
Yes, I'm very scary.
In Seattle, it was very espresso culture. It was very like the roaster and the barista, like they define everything. And then I joined Intelligentsia, and Intelligentsia was like the roaster's job is to get the fuck out of the way of the quality of the coffee. And to some extent, like that's true. The roaster does get to author a part of that story. But their primary goal should be to emphasize what's already great in the coffee. And that is...
Which is what Jeff's talking about.
Right. And that is hard.
It is so hard.
Talk about the difficulty in roasting, because
So
a lot of this audience might not know what actually goes into roasting.
So if you think about the roaster, particularly, so the farmer, the producer, they've grown all of these wonderful coffees. And you, as the roaster, are like the chef to really highlight this one ingredient, this one product, and give it so much glory. And it can go very wrong so many ways because you're working with this machine that...
Usually 50 years old or more.
Yeah.
Yes. Or not.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of variables. There's air, there's heat, it's science in one big thing. Okay, you're thinking about physics, you're thinking about chemistry. You are a chef of one particular thing, and you may never have roasted this particular coffee before, and you use, like way back when I was roasting, they didn't have lovely systems to track, how the heat. And so just like a good chef, you're using part of it as art, your senses, but also you're using a lot of science.
And you can really fuck it up pretty easily, too.
You can mess it up really.
Yeah, it's like a souffle.
Really bad.
Right, okay. I want to get to nicely, too, because I want to explain through your statement now, like, what is a multi-roaster cafe versus a Intelli or Go Get 'em, which is now as a roaster. You roast your own coffee.
I mean, look, I can talk on multi-roaster programs and everything, but I'm a single roaster.
Oh, you are
sorta
single.
guy,
Sorry. Okay.
We started.
He's monogamous.
I'm a dedicate to some philosophies. And
Okay.
I've tried my best to be a good representation of those. So we started out as a 4-barrel account, then we work with Cat and Cloud now, and they've been fantastic to work with, offering a dynamic range of coffees that we can play with. I mean, I often thought that the challenge of multi-roaster programs and having to toggle multiple roast philosophies and try and make all of those taste delicious was. It's arduous alone with just a single origin coffee, trying to highlight all the best qualities of that coffee, let alone maybe 3 different ways it might have been roasted. So I like working with just one roaster. I've got a great relationship. I mean, they listen to the styles of profiles we would like to offer in our cafe. They're fantastic.
So Kyle used to be multi.
Yeah, we were multi-roaster, and it was great. I mean, we started off... I think, first of all, there's like 2 ways to be multi-roaster, and one is like whatever the brand is hot, you just buy some of their coffee and you don't taste it. I had actually had the privilege of of getting a chance to buy some coffee when I worked at Intelligentsia and getting sort of accustomed to QC protocols where you bring in a lot of different coffees and you taste them blind and then you choose the ones that are the highest quality. And so when we started GMB, that was kind of our premise. We wanted to have all the roasters send us their best coffees, and we wanted to cherry pick the coffees blind and select them without knowing how much they costed or anything like that. And so it was like many, many times more work to do that, and I'm not complaining.
More
it was
fun though, right?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and it was very worthwhile. And like we have a database that still exists somewhere of like everybody's best coffee from 2012 through 2016 or 2017. So we hit a point though with the multi-roaster thing where we just started to feel like, well, first of all, when a barista takes a coffee, they are in conversation with the roaster because each coffee, especially when you're working with a bunch of different roasters, they all extract differently. They all have their own sort of nuance and like, depending on the machine or the person behind it or the philosophy of the roasters. And I think we realized that our quality was capped by our lack of familiarity with what we were offering.
With a single, like a control, basically.
Yeah, and so we realized that, if we could sort of level up and take like the next rung in the supply chain under our own custody, that we would be defining the quality higher up in the more definitive moment. And we were just ready for it.
I just want to, is there somebody brave in the audience who can raise their hand? This is like some complicated shit, right?
This is very in the
weeds.
weeds.
Can anyone admit that like this is like really complicated? Because thank you in the back. Like coffee is...
No, it's extremely in the weeds.
It's in the weeds, but this is what coffee, this is the third way, this is what craft coffee is all about, these topics, and this is really what informs the cafe and the roasting. So I just want to say, like, it's cool to have these individuals speaking about these topics on the record in front of you. So I hope it's not going over anyone's heads. I just think it's important. I just want
to appreciate this opportunity.
Is.
No, to appreciate this opportunity though too, to give us this scope to discuss it in a way. I mean, thank you. I mean, we understand that this amount of attention has been given toward to food for the better part of 20 years. We've got channels dedicated to it now. So our ability to focus on it, talk about it, discuss it in the medium that makes most sense for our generations now. I mean, I think it's fantastic. So thank you.
Well, I'd like to.
It's cool.
I'd like to suggest something as another means of framing exactly what we've all been talking about with regard to the roaster and the barista and what's our role in all of this and from where does quality derive. And I was thinking a good analogy that maybe is easy for us all to sink our teeth into is this idea that if coffee is a song, the artist, the original artist, there's a songwriter who makes it. So, Yesterday. Amazing song, right? It makes you emotional, makes you want to cry. You've heard a dozen different singers sing it over the years. Paul McCartney wrote that, and he crafted something that has this defined intrinsic beauty. It's a composition that's gorgeous, and it's dripping with intrinsic quality. But then it takes a singer and a piano player, another musician, to bring it to life, to give it expression, to make it visceral and allow you to feel it. And then it takes, at the end, a sound engineer who's taking what was laid down by the musicians and the singer and just tweak the knobs a little bit and make sure the resolution, the clarity comes through brilliantly. And that's when it becomes this work of this masterpiece, right? And in that analogy, the barista is the sound engineer. They're taking the raw recording and they're just finessing it and they're playing with the levels until it really feels great. And each of them might do it a little differently. Steve Albini might do it differently than somebody else, but they're putting their stamp on it. The musicians are interpreting what's there, and between the three of them, they produce something that's incredible. But I don't think, as coffee consumers, oftentimes we pay attention to the singer. We don't pay attention to the songwriter, and that's where the industry has a lot of growth in front of it. If we want to build a better, more articulate, and a better platform, really, for quality to thrive. And that's where this coming back to the. I feel a little bad now that I dropped a big stinky poop in the audience with the R. Kelly comment. I want to clarify that. I mean, the
And he came back to it too.
Yeah.
you know, I mean,
You know,
He's a man of
here's
metaphor.
the thing.
I kind of forgot about that, Jeff.
We know what you meant, man. Go ahead, deliver.
Here's where I was going with that. Is that, you know, there's this person produced some things that are really beautiful in the world, that have had an impact, a positive impact in the world, and espresso has done that. But this person is also a real horrible human being and has created a lot of distress in the world. And espresso has also done that.
Wow.
And
There's truths about espresso that are behind every door when you open the door.
I'm grateful to say that's not my impression of it, man. That
Kyle, yeah.
I can't sell espresso that way.
This is
Jeff.
let me.
I
Sorry,
can't
Jeff.
do it.
I'm gonna.
I mean, Jeff has demonstrated the high and the low
Yeah.
of his metaphorical prowess.
No, we're going.
This comes from his liberal arts education.
I'm into it.
I mean, you definitely did not cook up that whole songwriter thing right now, right?
No.
well,
It was good. It was good.
Most of it, but
I'll just.
R. Kelly inspired me.
I'll
that
just
way.
steal Jeff's to his second metaphor, the more fortunate one. I'll say that it was like, let's put the technical Grammys on during prime time. Obviously, no one is doing that. Like, the technical Grammys are obviously still at 5 p.m. But maybe it will change one day, and maybe there'll be an audience for technical Grammys. I want to pivot to the sunny state of coffee in Los Angeles is the name of this, and we are in LA talking about coffee, and as I said at the top, this is a great city. But let's talk about why this city in particular is very special. Jeff, you don't live here, but you started Intelligentsia here. We'll start with you, and then we'll go down. I just want to hear a little bit about that first moment when you opened Intelli here in Silver Lake and the significance of it. And then I think we'll just move down a little bit because everyone has it.
I mean, it was gorgeous and exhilarating and exciting because we started in 1995 in Chicago, and it wasn't until we'd been learning about coffee, building our craft, trying to get better at what we do, trying to understand it, and then trying to convince Chicago consumers to get into quality and start to really care about all this nuance in coffee, and it was like banging your head against the wall a lot because I love Chicago, it's my city, but it can be very stubborn and pragmatic and not necessarily all that ready to embrace new things.
Meat and potatoes town. I'm from Michigan, I can say that.
And so it came out here, and all of a sudden we opened a store in Sunset Junction, and we're doing the same thing we did in Chicago, but applying everything we'd learned up until that point. So we were breaking a few different paradigms, which Kyle actually had
I
a
want
lot
Kyle
do
to
as
talk
well.
about that because you were working there, the paradigms that were being broken.
Yeah. Well, LA didn't have this thing. And it was interesting for me because I moved down from Seattle, and Seattle had this espresso culture, and there was a thing about baristas. Every cafe in 2005 in Seattle had to pour latte art. You come down here, and it's just it was not happening.
What was here?
So the two places, so there was Groundwork, which was notable. Cafe Lux had opened in Santa Monica, and they were like a Vivace sort of account. But with respect to them, like they weren't really like that. They weren't like changing people's minds. And Intelligentsia, I think part of it is we landed in Silver Lake. Part of it is like we gave no fucks, and we just kind of decided like we were going to, if there was no template here, if there was no expectation, then there was like we could write the rules. And so I don't think people realize, like at the time, that coffee shop brewed every cup of drip coffee to order, named the farm on the menu, offered many different coffees from many different farms in 2007, and had a single origin espresso and a blend espresso and all this stuff.
Menu. You had a menu of espressos.
A menu
which
of
was
coffees. You could
never
choose.
seen.
You could choose your appellation. You could choose, your flavor profile, and the person behind the bar could tell you about it. And that's why we got mocked like endlessly. But it was also why we had like 3-hour lines when we opened to drink the coffee. That was the definitive moment in LA sort of third wave coffee, and it's interesting because it's only been 12 years. But like I think, I hope that coffee drinkers in this town sort of preserve that sense of history in the same way that Angelinos have been so good at doing that with our other sort of iconic
natural
things.
resources.
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, like whether it's like a restaurant, that, we all like, okay, so like Intelligentsia in LA was like, I don't know, it was like Chez Panisse. Like it was like that. It was that level of sea change. And not just in LA. Because there were no rules, everything we did was more ambitious, more turned up. And that was the beacon for specialty coffee in the world, really, truly.
No, I give them credit for moving me down here. I mean,
what's just explain your history?
Anytime anybody asks me about how I got to Los Angeles, I end up bringing up Kyle's name, being the guy to convince Intelligentsia to fork down a decent amount of money to move this barista from Seattle to help, establish this place in Venice. And I didn't know that I was going to be working at the Silver Lake, location for like 10 months and kind of, what they had broken, the rules for in getting here and earned a certain amount of reputation, if you will, for being a certain kind of way, for giving no fucks, then I was that dude that, I came along and all of a sudden, like...
We gave a lot of fucks.
We gave lots of fucks.
They gave too many fucks.
Well,
that was
to the degree though where like I remember some of my first shifts on bar though, the clientele was had a certain amount of attitude with me, and being one of those baristas at Espresso Vivace, I was used to being treated a certain way, and I'll own that. That because of the way we loved coffee, we loved espresso, we served it a certain way. Like our clientele responded to us a certain way, and I think Silver Lake and Los Angeles was, or starting to come around to that. So, that was the first sort of impression of those styles of people that, man, these people really care about this. And then again, Intelligentsia's commitment to be like, we care about creating this culture of professionals. So we're going to find people that care enough about it and we're going to bring them down here. And so, I'm not here in Los Angeles, if not for Intelligentsia and for Kyle, to be saying, 10 years later, and, after, it was at the end of 2008 is when I moved down here, that, here I am.
That shop is the rootstock for LA specialty coffee. It's like Campanile for restaurants.
Chez is a great example. Bronwen, do you have something to add about the early days? Because you were here too.
Yeah. Not only, it was an interesting time in specialty coffee in general, and I think with counterculture, Intelligentsia, Stumptown, they all started in in the mid 90s, and that's when they really start. And around 2005 to 2007, that's when the producer really became highlighted within specialty coffee. And what's amazing about Los Angeles and why, counterculture is here today, as well as Intelligentsia and Stumptown and La Colombe and all of these other companies is...
Go get him, Tiger.
And
Menotti.
you were already here before then. I'm talking about the bigger guys. You have all of these companies that really started...
I am a big guy.
That's your opinion.
I am a very big guy.
But you're not a tiny juggernaut like me.
True.
Wow. There's like a measuring stick somewhere.
If you could understand, even I could sense like a certain amount, like there's people in the industry competed with each other or around each other, knowing of each other. The familiarity there to joke that way. No, it's awesome from my perspective too, being one of those young baristas watching this.
The podcast people who are, it's in your ears. It's all love, lots of smiles here. I want to also, we're going to go back like we did with the espresso question. I have one other question. Let's talk about ready to drink, RTD. Those big ass bottles of cold brew that you see everywhere now, everywhere. Nicely, I'm looking at you. Let's start with you. What do you think about this? How does this affect you?
We don't bottle anything currently. We tried our hand at it, decided to do something else. But I think the idea of meeting people where they're at is big to me. When I serve people and understanding, like, if they come to me and they've been used to a caramel frappuccino, well, then I'm going to make them something sweet and delicious to make sure they leave my shop happy, Now, if a big bottle of cold brew is going to do that for me, man, I'm happy to reflect on experiences that I've had where I've been like, that was pretty good, and, I'll speak on it, So, again, if it allows me an opportunity to connect with a customer in a way that's genuine, that helps them patronize my business, I'm happy about that. I see it in the bigger picture in the sense, we're creating more coffee drinkers in a way that when they follow the history back, or when they decide to dig a little deeper or go next level, they end up finding places like ours.
So it's like a gateway drug to like filter to like.
I totally call my Spanish latte a gateway latte. You know what I mean? Like, I just gotta own it. You know what I'm saying?
I like it.
You meet them where they're at. It's sweet and delicious. You see them every day. You know.
Kyle, what do you think about RTD?
I am very concerned that people who buy coffee in a bottle at the grocery store might think that that's what good coffee is.
That's the hammer I wanted to drop. I mean, that's what...
I actually think it's... So RTD is like a real economic driver for this industry, and I will not discount that.
Of course.
RTD is also putting more coffee in people's homes, and I think that's...
You bottled too, right?
Yeah, I mean, we bottled and then sold it the same day. We didn't
But
do
you bottled. You bottled your coffee.
But putting something in a bottle is not the same as
My
pasteurizing.
point being, you made it ready to drink for them.
Yeah, but we do that anyways.
Right then and there,
No.
they come in. My thing is like I thought you guys were doing it well. So I thought you if anybody would have taken the next level, would have been you guys.
Right. I mean, it cannot be taken to the next level. There is no... I don't like any of it. I think it all tastes bad, with the exception of the La Colombe Draft Latte, which is fucking delicious.
Wow, that's a controversial statement.
It has
feel.
nothing to do with the coffee quality. It's just like engineered.
It's like a Guinness.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
Bravo, La Colombe.
Yeah.
But the black... I mean, that is stale coffee. There is no way to... Like, it is not a shelf-stable product. I, as a business owner, understand every single one of the motivations for people to want to literally bottle this thing and ship it out to people's homes. Coffee freshness is a thing. It is one of the things, and that's like at every stage. And so,
Amen.
I'm like, yeah. So, like, I'm like down for everybody getting their money. Like, get paid, please, get paid. But I am.
But who's getting paid for for the La Colombe?
I mean, La
Latte?
Colombe should get paid for the draft latte because that shit is genius. But that's everything that we talked about for the 40 minutes that led up to that question was not that.
Exactly, and that's why I wanted to leave at the end. Bronwen,
Yeah,
add a
I
little
agree.
bit.
It is a great way to get consumers to drink more specialty coffee, but it's not special. Whatever Geoff has done, or other coffee companies, like Counterculture spends so much time really building partnerships with other producers, just like Intelligentsia, and it just seems to discount everything that they have worked for. And it doesn't taste bad, but it's not that great.
And then there's the farmer. Where does the farmer come in our ready to drink?
Have you ever seen a farm name on an RTD bottle?
Have you ever seen a country on one?
I think maybe once.
Yeah, I mean...
I mean, there...
Well, there's...
Oh yeah. When we bottled it, we did state what coffee it was that we brewed and I mean so I will say, like, I've seen some of that on packaging. So I mean but that helps. Again, it's if somebody's discerning enough to then read what country it came from and care enough about that, well then the next time that they're in a cafe and they decide to ask well, what country did this brew I'm about to have come from, again, if it sparks up enough of an organic conversation where we're creating rapport, we're creating an everyday customer, that's helping coffee as a whole.
So, like, there's probably some people who feel shame for drinking cold brew right now, but Jeff's going to really make you feel like shame right now because we're going to talk about farmers and cold brew. Those two words, what does that mean to you?
What does that mean to me? Well, I mean, first of all, let me just say, let me drop a statistic on you. There are several tens of million coffee farmers in the world, and over 90% of them